Thomas, we last sat down on Monday, the 14th of August, 2023. You were building Canopey, the world's first eco-verified marketplace. You were fundraising at the time. What has happened since then?
Steph, that's the biggest question you could have asked me to open anyway. That's so much, right? Canopey doesn't exist. So that's the biggest sort of alarm, I think. But also I've gone like deeply to the dark side into venture capital, which is like the other big thing that I'm sure we'll dig into. I think fundamentally, like what's changed since 2023 is that, like, you'll know, you come and learn so much in startups. So like what feels not that, like, if you put it into timeline, it's not that long ago, right? It's like a year and a half, or like, yeah, a year and a half basically. But actually it feels like 10. It feels like so much has happened. I've learned so much about startups, about VC, about the world, of course. So yeah, I mean, so much has changed.
So why did Canopey end?
Yeah, the big question. I think, like, fundamentally what happens with startups is that you have such a big, hairy, audacious goal as a founder, and sometimes, like, it's not the right thing. And I think that it can be really hard as a founder to let go when it's not the right thing or when something's not working. So, I mean, my lesson throughout all of that, like, it was my second startup. My first startup, closed not because of anything I did wrong, but just because a pandemic came. And it was like, I hadn't really gone through the trials and tribulations of a founder making mistakes because I've been so lucky in the first startup, right? So with Canopey, there was a lot of learning, just like, even though, yes, I knew all the, like, setting up a company, I knew about fundraising, yada, yada, yada. But it was like this whole shift of now we've raised venture capital, now we're growing. How you navigate the challenges as a founder, but also with your team, and the dynamics between that, it changes. And I think that there's no one thing you can say which this is why Canopey didn't work. But I mean, I left Canopey sort of middle of last year, so not that long after we spoke. And it's crazy because when we spoke, it was big fundraise coming up. This was going to be our big seed round. It was going to really take us from sort of being this really ambitious, like, young, like, new disruptor to actually establish processes and growing. And we had a real good plan for that. And I think fundamentally what happened is just like we experienced a lot of challenges. It put strain on the team. So when I left, I think that the others did the best they could to keep it going. Unfortunately it didn't work out, but that maybe there are other plans for them and me in the pipeline. So yeah, you take the learnings and you grow from it.
Exactly. And with those learnings is something I really want to dive into here, because you amass these battle scars, and the whole purpose of the show, like, strategy and tragedy, is like, not to put anyone off entrepreneurship,
no, of course,
just to kind of relay that, like, realistic view of, like, sometimes I think in this age of social media, it's more important to have a show like this one to showcase the realities, the stories, because even when we post this stuff onto, we've talked before about how much the algorithm does seem to reward, like, the humble bracket and the celebrations, all these sorts of things. So what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from Canopey not working out?
I think there's another thing just to add on to that, is that I turned 30 in 2 months, and Forbes 30 under 30 was just announced.
Right.
And LinkedIn goes crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we all know it's a bit of BS. Like, we all know it's like kind of a bit of who you know. I'm not putting any shame on the people who win. They do amazing things. But and I think that when you're coming up to 30 and you're a startup founder, particularly when you've had a couple of startups, you've raised venture capital, it kind of becomes like a stupid vanity metric that you look at.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe is one of the learnings, is like not getting too obsessed with what others are doing, not getting too obsessed with like the vanity metrics around startups, and really just building really good, solid business that really solves a problem for your customer.
Yeah.
And I think actually with Canopey as well, as much as there's this huge growing want to be more sustainable, and we kind of knew that what we were trying to solve was this difference between want and action, or intent and action gap. I think that we underestimated the lack of willingness from sort of mainstream population, maybe, to even if you sell the argument that, okay, there's a price premium on purchase, but it saves you money over time. Like, it's quite hard to do, like, when you've got big macroeconomic changes happening.
Yeah.
And I think maybe you can underestimate that when you're so bullish about your own solution. The biggest learning, I think, and I think it's not that we didn't know this as founders, or I speak for myself, but more that we didn't follow it. Like, we knew it, but we kind of ignored it. Is that you should be absolutely obsessed with your problem, not with the solution you think is going to solve that problem, because you have to be willing to sort of wiggle your way around startup world to solve the problem for your user.
So one of the many contradictions within the world of entrepreneurship that I'm obsessed with is trying to reconcile, on the one hand, the tenacity, the persistence, the determination, the clear vision, everything that, Thomas, you have in spades, versus that agility, that like letting go of certain aspects and just focusing purely on the problem, on solving a customer need. How do you reconcile those two, especially now having been through what you've been through with Canopey?
Yeah, I think they're not mutually exclusive for sure. Like, I think that with Canopey, I still believe that the overall way, like, solution that we were looking at is what's going to solve the problem. But I think, and I can be bullish about that, but I think the way that we implement that or way we roll it out can be different. It's basically the difference between your sort of North Star and the day-to-day operations of the company. How you get there is kind of irrelevant. That's what you need to be flexible with. But like, what you're trying to do, it is ultimately, you should be bullish about it and believe that that's true. And obviously this always needs to be evidenced. I was talking to my new colleagues, which we'll come on to, I'm sure, in a bit, but I was talking to them a little bit this weekend about what makes a sort of 1% founder. We were trying to really dig into this sort of power law of founders and startups. And one of the things that I'm really, I guess, quite confident about in a good founder is that there is an arrogance, but it's an arrogance with evidence. So, you know, you can be, I think we talked about it, about being sort of like disagreeable, but like, but in the good, in the right way. You don't want to just piss people off, but you need this confidence, you need this belief that you know better, because, well, sure you do, because no one has solved this yet, right? So you have to believe that you know better than them.
Right.
But you have to evidence that with like your ability to build, your ability to sell. Selling is everything. And I think like this makes a 1% founder in that they've got this arrogance, but they show again and again and again that the arrogance is justified. And it takes time, right? Like, no one can just have that as a first-time founder. Like, you've got to prove yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And do you know what? That perfectly aligns with something that an investor actually said on the show as well, with like, a bit disagreeable. And I love how you phrase that around the arrogance with evidence. That's a really good little pithy soundbite there. I love that. How does that translate to fundraising? When storytelling is everything, especially in those early days, you've got to have that level of conviction.
I think that my approach on this and opinion of this has slightly changed in the last sort of 6 months. So again, we'll come on to it, but I work at a venture capital fund now. And I think that when you're a founder, you believe that when you're raising money, your obsession is to sell your equity. Basically, it's like, but for the best price, almost like you're selling your product for the best price. And that's true. And you need that, and you need the ability to weave your story and to navigate challenging questions. But I actually think like now there's an aspect of also like honesty, humility, like really in these conversations early with VCs or any investor, is actually an incredibly valuable trait to bring to the table. You don't need to know everything. And I think that as founders, we generally think we do need to know everything. So we'll have an FAQ document which answers every question under the sun, and in a pitch we'll like the pushback from a VC, well, we should have the answer and we should have conviction in that answer. And actually it's okay to go, we just don't know yet. But here's how we're trying to find out. Here's how we're learning. Here's how we've dealt with a different challenge. It shows that we can deal with these things even if we don't know right now. And actually, when we look at startups at the fund, this is something which is actually really valuable. Is, do they have the humility to be able to be transparent with us about those challenges, but the arrogance to know they can solve them?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's what it is. I was just thinking, at least demonstrating you've got an awareness of your blind spots. I think that's a huge when the alarm bells kind of go, if like you're not even aware of it, like how much does that arrogance seep into hubris that creates those blind spots? Like, it's fine to not know, to your point, but demonstrate you're aware and that you've got the figure out ability skill to solve it. We will come on to what you're doing now and your perspective from the VC angle for sure, because now you can talk about from the founder perspective versus investors. So that's really exciting. Just sticking with kind of the Canopey chapter for a sec as well. How has, almost like, I'm sure you've done, even just in your own mind, a bit of a post-mortem. What are some of the other lessons that have come out of that for you, and how has it made you a better entrepreneur and even investor today?
Yeah, I think like again, we're always told it, but no one ever listens. It's don't build until you've got a demand for what you want to build. At Canopey, look, I've worked in the industry that Canopey was building in my whole career. So there was a deep founder knowledge like that I brought to the table, which shouldn't have dictated what the product was going to be, but we let it. And it wasn't that we didn't do customer research. It wasn't that we didn't do market research, but it was this like underlying belief that, well, we've seen all the problems in the industry, right? Because Thomas has worked there for so long. So therefore, this product that we're solving is almost like every time we did a customer interview, we would be like, yeah, our product solves this, like almost trying to mold our product into their problem rather than letting our product be defined by their issue, right? Their problem itself. So I think like really, really fundamentally as a founder, and I mean, equally also, I mean, maybe we'll talk about that. I also I'm building something else as well. And, and
definitely.
Like the way that's being done is so inherently foundationally different to how we did it at Canopey. We built nothing until we had people basically begging to use an imaginary product which didn't exist yet, but we were like, okay, we can solve that problem. Yeah, we know how we can solve that, but we didn't know what that would look like yet. So then you get enough of these people saying these things, what they want solved, and then you go, okay, here's what this initial product can solve. It's one of the things that keeps coming up through these problems of the customers, and that's what we're going to like really fixate on, because it means you can just get it out there and solve a problem instantly. People will pay you, and then you can start building other stuff. With Canopy, it was like there's this huge problem to solve. Let's build the platform, the product that solves this problem. And it's like, that's a monumental task. Like, there was no real MVP. It was like, let's just go all out. And I think that's a mistake. And I think that's a huge learning curve for me as a CEO. I wasn't the techie of the company, but when you're involved at like the head of the company and the head of the vision, like you kind of get involved in all of those decisions, right? You have to be. And so I think that's a huge learning. I think the other learning is just is people you surround yourself with. Like, people have different ways of working, and it's so hard to know that until you've worked with them.
So any tips now, like red flags, green flags, how can people start to assess what someone will be like to work with until they work with them?
I honestly think it's an incredibly hard question to answer. I had a call with another VC today who was looking at bringing in another co-founder to one of their portfolio companies, and it's like, how do you assess that? Because they could work together for 2 weeks, 2 months, and it might not be enough to tell you how they'll be in 2 years. Even in my situation, I don't one of my co-founders for years, like nearly a decade, right? By the time we parted ways, and yet the way we worked together was very different, even though we knew each other so well and we thought we knew everything about each other. And it's not a criticism to either of us. It's just different. And I honestly don't think you can know that for sure. And it's a bit of a risk you have to take as a founder with your co-founder if you have one. And even with your first hires, it's the same sort of risk,
exactly,
right?
Of course.
Because you can't spend 2 years hiring someone. You can't spend 2 years.
You can't have a decade-long trial, can you?
Yeah, exactly.
What's your stance on that then? In kind of psychometrics, personality profiles, all these sorts of things to help mitigate that?
The biggest thing I would say to look for if you're looking for a co-founder is their willingness to grind through really hard times. I think that it is probably the single largest pressure on you as co-founders. When things get tough, who's there every day, every hour, solving the problem, and who still wants to consider the fact that things might be smooth sailing and want to take a holiday or whatever. Again, I think that there is no right answer here, but I think that if you're not aligned on what that way of work is, it will cause problems. And I think that you could probably both do one way, and that you could probably work it out and build a great startup as long as you align with that. But you could also both be like super hardcore grinders, like in the hard and even in the good times. And so long as you both are like, I don't think you necessarily have to be exactly the same, but there's like a complete respect and understanding of it from both people, which again is a learning for me. Like, I never stop working, Steph. So like, and I love that. And that works for me.
Yeah.
Comes from swimming days. We talked about this in the last episode. Like, and I think that that's great for me.
Yeah.
But needing to understand and respect others' way of working is so deeply important, which I hadn't fully gauged, I think, even in my second company. And bear in mind, the first company I was a solo founder, so I didn't really care. Like, I just do what I want.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I think that's probably the biggest one. And then I think this is actually something that we all aligned with really well at Canopey. So it wasn't a problem, but the empathy to the problem you're solving. I think that you really all need to be so deeply caring of solving it for whatever reason. It doesn't even have to be an impact-driven company. But if you're, for example, you could be building another fintech SaaS platform, which maybe I am, and so long as you really care about solving this, then that's fine. But if you're just doing it because you think it's going to make some money, or you think it's like, oh, there is a problem there, I mean, you might have really identified it, but you don't really care about solving it.
It feeds into your point on who's going to be there to pick up the slack when they're going gets tough, right? Because if you just don't care enough, that's not something that you can instill in someone through any sort of training, motivational speech. It's like that has to come intrinsically from that person. Just something connecting the dots a little bit here is a little bit on your point on arrogance with evidence. There's something they're connecting, whether it's co-founder pairings, hiring team members, and indeed even with those customer interviews, you're kind of touching on all those points, is the case for past behaviors, like that evidence, like whether it's were you doing customer interview, like the mum test, running into the spike, avoiding hypotheticals, right, is like a little tidbit in like the art of customer interviews, right? It's like avoid what do you think of the sound of this? Would you do that? Like avoid is like, when in the past have you had that problem and what did you do about it? And whatever variation of that needs to apply, whether it is to customer interviews, co-founders, staff, to try and shortcut that a little bit. Because I know there's so many resources online with like top 50 questions to go through with the founder, like so many accelerators that do the matching and so at least, even though you can't tell for it completely until you get into it, at least your most solid reference point is going to be the past behaviors. When have they done this, or how did they solve that problem?
I think that, like, really fundamentally you need to look at the past. And I think that's why in VC, like, we look at these sort of like outlier traits, like really abnormal success. Was it sport? Was it like really good in a specific class? Were you a collector of like really interesting things? Like, I don't know, just something which like really pulls you away as like an obsession. Because it allows you to see what that person is really like, where they really love something. I can't remember exactly who it was I was talking to the other day, but it was a guy who's like connected with Y Combinator, and he was saying that the people who he surrounds himself with at the moment, and he's building a platform for them, it's not talking to them about the thing they do every day, which is their jobs. He's obsessing over the hobbies that they love to talk about, because that's something that they'll pay to solve. So if you can find a problem in the hobby that they do, in the abnormal trait that they show, then you're more likely to build an amazingly loyal customer if you solve something really valuable.
Exactly.
So I think that's a really interesting point when you get to know someone. And I think also one thing that I'm still like trying to work out how you could do it, but honestly I think if you've got like two founders who have just met each other who want to start a company, go put them in some sort of like escape room. Like, honestly, like, put them under like extreme pressure in a nice way. But like, it must show how these guys would work together.
That's a really good idea from some accelerators.
Maybe we should do it as a VC fund before we invest.
That would be hilarious.
Get the founders all in a really stressful situation. We probably wouldn't be loved if we broke up loads of companies though. So
better get it out of the way sooner than later. So Before we've hinted a lot at like what you're working on now. I want to hear all about that for sure. I guess closing the Canopey chapter, what would you do differently?
I would spend more time obsessing over the customer's problem rather than my focus on the problem, my knowledge of the problem. Founder market fit is important. It absolutely is. You need to know that this founder knows what they're talking about better than anyone who's tried to do it before, sure. But that doesn't necessarily reflect what the customer needs to solve the problem. So I think honestly, that's probably the biggest thing. And then if there was a secondary thing, it would get in an escape room with my co-founder.
Take your own advice with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love how just with, you know, that focus of the pain point is, as if we haven't belaboured the point enough for our listeners, but it's just another thought that comes to mind here is the problem needs to be so painful that somebody is willing to pay for it. And parting with your cash is essentially a conversion of your time, right? Like, we have two resources in this life. They are our time and our money. And most of us trade our time for that money. And so the value of that, however much the actual, you know, whatever the price actually is, it's just like taking on board like your reflections, especially from like the interviews, and trying to make it fit. You're just backing yourself further and further into that corner. Like, what is it that someone is willing to part with their cash over? That's the main question to stick with.
100%. And actually, one of the things I obsess now in climate tech, when looking at climate tech companies, for example, but it doesn't have to be climate tech, it can be anything, is, are you saving them time and money? Because then there's no logical reason why they wouldn't pay for it. Because if you can still save them time and money, and they still put some money on the table to pay you to solve it, you literally make their life so much easier.
Interestingly, on that, I have to plug my interview with Matt Lerner. Do you know who Matt Lerner is? He has a really interesting stance on like saving time and money. So have a listen to that one.
Okay.
Because basically his argument is, because this is you see it a lot with like B2B SaaS.
Yes.
Like on their way with like save time and money. It's just not, and this is more from like a messaging perspective of like, it's not compelling whatsoever. And like his argument that just comes to mind on that is like, people don't actually mind spending time. So I think he used the example of like a good film, right? It's you'll happily sit through and watch like a 2-hour film if like you're being entertained, if there's like that level of value, of course.
But it's the difference between an individual and a company. So in my opinion, I think the individual absolutely obsess on their hobby and they'll spend time and money to the hobby. Whereas with a company, it ultimately all comes down to the bottom line. How much money am I spending as a company? How much money am I making as a company? And how much time are my staff or my employees spending doing things?
Yeah, of course.
And if you can save all of that and make them money, then as a company, it's a no-brainer. It doesn't have to be the sell on your marketing. But it's the action,
the internal.
Whereas you're and Matt's absolutely right. Like with an individual, you're far more likely to put the money on the table to actually spend more time doing your hobby, right?
Right. Exactly.
If you can. So I think it really depends on
positions.
and depends on the company. I mean, this is nuanced, right?
But
the point is good. But I think it does vary. Entity to entity.
All right. So what are you working on now?
Well, so the main thing I'm doing, as I sort of have been touching on, is that I've gone to the dark side. I'm a Sith Lord. No, we're joking. I've jumped into investing. So I work at what was an angel syndicate, and is now building up to become a fund, called Endgame Capital. We're a climate tech fund.
And how different is it being on the dark side, as you say, versus
I shouldn't say it.
Starving entrepreneur?
I shouldn't say that it's the dark side, because we're really trying to sell ourselves as a value-add investor, right? So like every investor says it, but you know, there is actual value that we bring. I promise everyone. But anyway, honestly, it's been really enlightening. I think that there's so much chat about VC, there's so much chat about founders, and honestly, I think a lot of it is like either misunderstanding from one side to the other, which is a problem that needs solving, or it's just fluff and opinion. Once you actually go and work inside, it doesn't have to be VC, you know, it could be as a full-time angel investor, it could be as a angel syndicate, or, you know, whatever structure it is, an accelerator, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you learn a deep respect for the work that's being done and why there are these things that don't get done, whether it's feedback, whether it's like completely open door policy. Like, I think that you start to understand why these problems exist.
Yeah.
Again, like, I want to solve those as well. But I think that as a founder turned VC, you maybe I'd want to speak to founder Thomas and tell him, you know,
this is why it's like this.
It's why it's like this. Yeah. And also maybe that'll give you a better understanding of how to play that game.
Exactly.
Which is important.
It's so important. And it makes total sense because I think just knowledge, information breeds that familiarity and understanding. Yeah. And I think that the gripes, the common complaints that we hear about on both sides of the fence are weak excuses to make either side feel better about themselves, because I think it is easier to finger point and blame others. Whereas it's like, actually, if we can put the ego to one side for a second and sit down and be like, look, are they actually dicks? Were they like born this way? Was the purpose of their life on this planet to dick you around?
Probably not.
Like, maybe, but probably not, right? You know, maybe there's a one or two, but like, let's ask that question. And for those of them, it was not. It's like there is a reason for this, but you don't. It's like in sports. It's like anything where there's opposite sides, where there's opposite teams. It's easy to have that like tribal mentality a little bit, isn't it?
And you understand, right? You sympathise with your own community.
Exactly.
So I totally understand it. I think one of the biggest learnings as a founder going into VC is that if your business is good enough, it will be funded. You know, we see a lot of deals in climate tech, of course. I mean, I sometimes get not climate tech stuff, like don't do that because that's not what we invest in. It's very obvious that we don't invest in your AI agent for email sorting. Like, thanks though. But the point being is that we see a lot of deals, and frankly, the ones which are compelling businesses will get a call with us.
On that note, and I know that what I'm about to ask you ties into something else you're working on, which we also want to hear about. But I have to ask you, straight off an interview I've just done, as well as like hearing accounts from female founders, BAME, black founders, unconscious bias, this underrepresentation. Quick one, so sorry to interrupt. I'm sure that you are on the edge of your seat listening to this interview, at least I hope so. I'm so aware of all the other podcasts that are already out there, so the fact that you've decided to tune in and listen to this one is not lost on me. If you can just go that one step further and hit that follow or subscribe button, doesn't cost a thing, takes 2 seconds. Now is your chance to do that. It means so much, really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the interview. But I have to ask you, straight off an interview I've just done, as well as like hearing accounts from female founders, BAME, black founders, unconscious bias, this underrepresentation, I have heard time and time again how much evidence, how compelling a case it is, but there is this unconscious bias that's in the way of funding some companies. So how does that argument hold up?
It exists 100% in VC, particularly from the white male VC. There is no way to ignore that, and I think the more we talk about it, the better. I think that we know it exists, so therefore, how do we solve it? Is important. I think that a lot of the solutions that are talked about are sort of plasters over a never-ending opening wound. You know, one thing that really frustrates me with these sorts of big questions is that, you know, there is an obvious lack of funding for female or non-white founders, but we also have to ask, like, how much opportunity is there right at the beginning of the rungs for female and non-white people to become founders and actually and get the network to become founders. 100%. And actually, I think this is almost like, it's a really difficult one because it's a huge societal sort of economic question, right? You're basically trying
big
to
stuff.
solve...
We're not talking about the weather on this podcast.
No. You know, forget VC and startup.
Climate change.
This is that's true. We actually do need to talk about the weather, but
all these typical like small talk. What is it like? Weather, politics. Is like, oh no, actually, these are huge.
They're huge things that do need to be said. But my point being is that, like, you know, fundamentally these are issues which are just societal, and it's not an easy solution. But it's also not that a great parallel example to this is that people in climate are really angry at the energy usage of AI. Instead of being angry at the energy usage of AI, why not be angry at what is sourcing energy or how we source energy, which is fossil fuels. If fossil fuels weren't the source of energy, then we wouldn't be angry at the consumption of AI because it would be renewable. In the same sort of sense, I think that we're angry at VCs for having this unconscious bias. It's not a VC problem. This is a societal patriarchal problem, white patriarchal problem. We can go deep into politics, which we're not going to. But I think that what VCs can do about that is surround themselves with those people. So for us, for example, we have like operator LPs, and we're starting a venture scout program. And a lot of that is really focused on bringing people who aren't looking like me around the table to help us make decisions on deals, so that it does remove some of the bias. But it's not a perfect solution, because these are like societal nurture things,
for
right?
sure.
So,
and this nicely segues into your other startup that you're building.
Yes. So on the side, which no founder should ever say, is Morpheus, which the whole concept of this came from originally that founders never receive feedback when they don't get a call. Right, usually. I mean, I try to give feedback to people, but for example, we have an inbound form as well at Endgame. If you aren't going to get a call on that inbound form, you won't hear from us. And that's a problem, I think. I think that founders should know why. And if there is a reason, then it should get back to them somehow. So that's where it sort of started. That's even more rife with exactly what we were talking about. If you're non-white, female, you're even more unlikely to hear back, particularly if you're not from finance. And even for white straight men, like if you're not in finance, it's immediately harder, like as well. Obviously not on the same level. So I think like this is where it all sort of started. And then I started working in VC, and I was like, well, shit, it's like, this is why this doesn't happen, because it's so inefficient. Then, you know, we spend hundreds of hours, like analysts particularly spend hundreds of hours reviewing deals, like, which need to be done, but like the way it's done is so inefficient. So the whole concept of Morpheus is, how do we speed up and get the best founders in more calls with the best VCs quicker? But by doing that, you also automatically allow for feedback to go back to every single founder who ever applies or wants to reach out to a VC or an angel investor. The idea being that that everyone hates these buzzwords, but democratize the investment cycle and remove that unconscious bias or conscious bias, at least until the first call. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing that any tech can do. Once I'm on call with a founder opposite me, right, then it is in my mind. How do you get bias out of that,
right,
without it being run by a robot, which there are VC funds which are trying to. I think you still need a bit of human touch. But at least to get these people in the calls, I think you have to make it more data driven. But you also have to make it unbiased, which is what Morpheus is completely. So this is the problem that we're obsessing over. And we've already sort of been working with some VCs on what that solution might look like. And it's exciting days, early days. We haven't even incorporated, because what's the point until you've got a paying customer, in our opinion. It's exciting.
So you're doing so much of this completely differently from before.
100%.
Really taking on board all of these lessons learned. How exciting.
Yeah, particularly as well with team. I think that, so I know, so my co-founder, who I won't mention on the podcast because we both still work our full-time jobs, but you know, she and I have been friends for 4 years. I actually interviewed her 4 years ago to become the CTO of Canopey when Canopey was greener, right at the beginning of the journey. She wasn't ready to jump into startups, totally fair, but we stayed in touch. We're aligned on morals, on ethics. I've seen how quickly she's progressed in her career to become a head of a department in this specific topic, in AI agents, in the specific industry that we work in. So there's an obvious founder market fit from a technical perspective, but the speed and the grind that she's put into her work really attracted me, because I was like, oh, it's like I'm looking in a mirror. Someone who actually works like super, super hard, like, and doesn't stop because they're so driven by their mission. So we met up at the end of last year when I was still sort of trying to work out what I was doing. I was doing a bit of work at Endgame before joining full time. I'd experienced this problem. I started talking to her about it. And, you know, what was originally meant to be like an hour dinner catch up ended up into like a 4-hour brainstorming session.
Incredible.
And it's just been, it's been brilliant. And in many ways, I think she's got this fire of a first time founder, which is actually, I need. Like, I'm a bit bitter as a founder. I'm a bit old. I feel a bit like frustrated. No, I know, but old in like I've had 2 startups.
Grey hairs.
They've both failed. I've seen lots of startups fail. So I think like her fire and almost like naivety, which is not an insult.
No,
like,
not at all.
It's brilliant because we balance each other in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Because we both work super hard.
Amazing.
But we have this sort of like experience versus naivety to make the best decisions.
Love that. I mean, I don't know how many founders would be where they were now if they didn't have that initial naivety.
Yeah.
Right? The amount of people.
We need it.
Yeah.
And even I like look. I can't claim to be an experienced VC, right? Like I haven't worked in the industry that long on this side of the table.
Yeah.
So I think like even with me, there's a certain naivety in believing like 100% that people will definitely want to solve. Every VC wants to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Well, I can only know by the VCs I've spoken to, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing, and I haven't worked in VC long enough to be able to go, yeah, for sure, every VC, but I believe enough
that
it is a solution, that this is a problem that needs solved.
That optimism there, which you absolutely need.
You need it.
Given that you are bitter now, bitter old man.
Great, that's such an attractive definition. I'll take it. I gave it to myself, so I can't really.
with these battle scars that you have so painfully amassed through multiple startups, now it sounds amazing, and knowing you as I do and seeing you through this journey, I too have like absolute belief, and I completely feed into like that optimism as well. But I think with kind of like post-mortem in mind and these scars and the cynicism that has been like bred over the years, not to dampen your spirits too much, but are you taking any sort of like pre-mortem now with your new ventures, with your new career change, to be like, okay, actually, I don't have that same level of blind optimism that my co-founder has, which is great, that balances me out. How can I now use that to my advantage to mitigate risks and make this a success this time around?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a bit of context as well. Like when I left Canopey, I was so bitter about startups that I almost left the industry entirely. I was like, I don't want to work in a startup. I don't want to work with startups. I don't want to work with investors. I was just really just like a real huge chip on my shoulder, right? Yeah. But not in a good way.
Were you going to go back into swimming? Were you going to do swim?
Probably not. Let's be real.
What was going through your head at that point where you were just like so fucked up with this?
I think that really fundamentally it came down to like really digging deep into my principles, my ethics, feeling frustrated at like maybe it's like lack of that in startup industry. You kind of, a lot of people sacrifice that to be successful.
Yeah.
I'm willing to do that.
Yeah.
So I think like, I literally just turned back to where I started, NGOs, charities. I was like, these guys, and I know them because I've worked there, are as selfless an employee that you can be. But there was also a reason that I left, right? And I think that I needed the time, months of, and in that I was still doing startup work, right? Like I was still mentoring. I was still like I hadn't shut the door, but I definitely was most of the way out.
Yeah.
And I think mentally as well, like a mental strain, like every time, kind of an anxiety to come back into the industry, worried that like, the same thing would happen. And I think it talks to that sort of pre-mortem of like doing a new startup is how do I mitigate that anxiety of that. But actually I think that the time allowed that to become a good chip on the shoulder to start something new again and to work in the industry again, but on the other side of the table, because I have a critical view of startup founders, but not in the way that it makes me bad at assessing them. It makes me
even better
want to find the best founders who are head and shoulders impressive above other people.
Yeah, amazing.
Who will build the best companies, right?
Yeah.
Which is what you need in investing. So I think like from a VC perspective, I'm still learning like the whole process of VC, and I will be like, look, I'm not one of the partners of the fund. I am there to learn and work as well, and I bring expertise, but by no way am I coming in as a seasoned investor. But I think that the beauty having this sort of existential crises of startups generally actually makes me a pretty good eye on deals.
1,000%.
And deals where even my colleagues or other VCs will be so hyped up about something because they've been really sold this by the founder, or they've really sold it by another VC who's investing, and then I'll come in and I'll just be like the grumpy old shit who's like, yeah, but it's not that good, is it? And it's not that it's not that good, it's that I want evidence that it's that good. I want evidence that this founder is arrogant in the right way. All of this stuff. You know, we warehoused a deal, we announced it a couple of weeks ago in this French startup. When I first met the founders, I was so suspicious of their arrogance, just because I was like, I know arrogant founders, and I know like
you can spot it.
Arrogant founders.
Yeah.
So like I was really trying to gauge it, and after the first call, I was like, I want to dig in on this more. And then the team met their team, and the team saw how they worked, and we had more calls with them, and just more and more realized these are arrogance, but with evidence. 100%. These guys are 1% founders that we should invest in. And it was easy to find that conviction with my and because also the colleagues had this like bullish optimism, right? It was like, okay, I should look into this, but like I'm going to do it in a suspicious way. So I think that's good on the investment side. From a startup side, I think that really fundamentally it just means that I'm learning everything that went wrong with like the startup. I think Canopey could have succeeded, but I think that we probably weren't the right team to do it at the time. And because of that, I think I take a lot more focus on how me and my co-founder work together, how we solve problems, when we disagree, when we're working, how quickly we reply to each other. Like, I think that I'm really focused on it, and not in a toxic way, but in a way where I'm giving internal assessment consistently about, is this right?
Yeah.
And now it's come to the point, and you can see in the way that I talk to her that I feel so confident that I've answered those questions for me. So I think in any startup I do now, if there'll be one after Morpheus, or if I'll just stay in venture capital, who knows? But I think that in anything, and in when assessing founders, it will be in like, if I can get to the point where I find conviction in this person or these people, then I will allow my sort of chip on the shoulder to become more of like a bullish enthusiasm for these people.
For sure, that makes sense.
Or it'll be like,
given how impressive of an entrepreneur that I believe you to be, and I'm going on record with you being such a backable founder in so many different ways, given that you're now on the VC side of the fence, how does it feel to wake up in the morning and say, these bitches don't stand a chance?
What, as in the founders?
This is like, if you know, you know. This is this meme interview question from Issa Rae to Zendaya, which is just like, how does it feel to wake up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror and think, damn, these other bitches don't stand a chance?
I do not think that, honestly. I think that maybe you give me too much hype.
I'm joking. But I do, having, you know, and the conviction that I have as well, I've said to you many times, like, I'm not blowing hot air up your ass. I'm going on the record with this. The conviction that I have is the vast array of first-hand data points that I have amassed as it relates to entrepreneurship. So number one, you've got my own business for 5.5 years. We worked with over 100 startups in that period of time. That's just the number that became clients, let alone the much wider network. Now I'm at about 60, 70 quality one-to-one hour-long interviews. This is almost like a massive research project in itself, like getting to spend this much quality time with entrepreneurs. I now mentor MBA students in entrepreneurship. My network continues to grow. So I hope that all adds to, you know, the justifications to why I say that. And I think, honestly, where I'm going with that is I feel really sorry to any fundraising founders that are pitching at Endgame Capital.
No, but I think
they've got to be so good.
But I think that even with John and Ginna, the founders of the fund, like, they take that approach too. Ginna is a 2-time founder turned investor. She also has been there and done that, and really understands that problem from an operator perspective as well. Has worked with huge international clients in her previous corporate life, and it's like, I think that we all come with this open door policy, but kind of a no bullshit policy.
Yeah.
Of like, we're here to back great businesses that are led by the top 1% of founders that like will solve the biggest crisis that we have today, which is the climate crisis, in our opinion. But they have to like really foundationally be good business. So I think like and this is where John is so valuable in this, I think, because me and Jenna have had this bullish enthusiasm as founders, and John has come from sort of private equity to climate tech VC, done his MBA, like come back again to climate tech VC. So he has seen so many great, amazing founders, and so many founders that say they're great and aren't. And I think that mix of kind of approach and perspective from each of us allows us to, like make it challenging to get investment, but knowing that if you did get investment from us, we're so bullish about you that we will go all the way with you. We'll support you. We'll open doors for you. We know the people who will get you to the right place. And I think that this is such a important reason why I joined Endgame, is that it wasn't just VCs talking about investing in like the wishy-washy climate problem that most VCs talk about. It was VCs who deeply care, firstly, but also like have a really critical approach on climate tech and the climate tech founders around that. And I think that was so relevant to me as well. I needed people who also had this critical approach, because otherwise I would consistently get frustrated at maybe naive optimism.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's valuable, and I really appreciate all the comments, but I also think that we see so many founders who are so impressive that it's actually quite an inspiration as someone who's now building another company as well, like to be like, wow, these guys are so awesome that I would love to be in that category, right? Like, but I'm hopefully like honest enough to accept that I'm not yet. And I say yet because like,
for sure,
look, I'm not 30 yet, 2 months to go, so still time. no
it sounds like a really rigorous process with Endgame Capital. And so for anyone who is fundraising listening in, what is it that you guys are looking for exactly?
I mean, exactly to the pinpoint, sure. I think really fundamentally we look for, obviously at a baseline, it's exceptional founders who have like really just exceptional experience either in the space or just like can bring this like real founder pedigree mindset to startups, to climate tech, even if they haven't worked in climate tech necessarily. But as businesses, what we look for is really tech defensible, software and hardware, but it has to have a defensibility to it. And it has to be near commercialization. Now, what we mean by that is you could still be doing pilots, but there's not that much research or R&D that needs to go from these pilots to being a scalable commercial solution or product in the market. The best thing about what I love about what we do is that we use the phrase climate-denier-proof. And what we mean by this is that even Donald Trump would buy it. Even the people who don't give a flying crap about climate will buy this product because it's good business.
I love that.
So more efficient, more affordable, better. And this is a real foundational part of the Endgame thesis, is this sort of capitalism first, but impact by design. So as you scale as a commercial business, your impact scales. And I think also, like, we're climate tech investors, right? We look for a really quantifiable impact. We have to see that. But I think if you're trying to sell to your end users that the impact is what they buy, we're going to struggle to find conviction in you. Because really what you should be selling them is this brilliant business. And then it's also like, we can see that if this succeeds, it's going to have a 50 million ton GHG mitigation every year for you at scale. Like, it's exciting that we can have that impact, but it has to not be the selling point.
What a perfect role for you, Thomas. Like, given everything you've been through, experiences, your roles at NGOs, your passion, Canopey, everything that's happened, it's like, it's almost like you were destined to be in this position. It's incredible. And you know what? I can't remember exactly how I phrased the question, but I do vaguely remember asking you a similar question 2 years ago with Canopey around the capitalist aspect of it, because we've already belabored the point on not having gone deep enough on an intense enough pain point for people to pay. But I think knowing so many other amazing climate focused entrepreneurs, what I'm, at least from my vantage point, what I'm seeing over and over is that it's a feel good kind of lagging factor for consumers. It's not the leading decision driver. So everything that you're talking about in terms of the investment thesis now with Endgame relates exactly to that. So it's just, that's also where everything just feels like it's neatly all coming together now.
And I think I had to go through the phase of Canopey.
Yeah, exactly.
All that learning that comes with trying to solve this huge problem and really believing that people had the intent to do it gives you this real just like baptism of fire that people don't. And it's not to say people don't care. That's not the point. The point is that there's so much going on in people's lives, so much going on in business, that we have to solve a real problem for them, and it happens to have a great climate impact, and I think that's really, really pivotal to it. And I think it's funny because we probably did talk about it in the last episode, like ideologically, like, you know, if you spoke to Thomas, who did his politics degree, you know, 12 years ago, he would hate that I work in VC, but it's because of the naive optimism. It's not the wrong opinion. It's just that Thomas hadn't experienced how people really buy things, how people put money on the table, and ultimately like how the world works.
And I'm obsessed with this point as well, because there's something on here too around like goal setting, ambitions, beliefs, and there's this element of, I'm the most like consistent person. Like, we were sat doing a podcast 2 years ago, right? I'm still here interviewing, right? I'm still going. Like, I'm very consistent, which like can be good, can be bad, right? Like, not showing off about that, but oh crap, I just lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
I was talking about ideologically.
So this is where it's like I can hold on. I can be like, this is the plan. I can be like, this is the plan. I'm also like a good executor, which again, not good, not bad, right? But I'm consistent. I execute. This was the plan. This was our mission. This was the goal. But what you touch on, which is so interesting, is but like in that space of time, you have gathered more intel, more data, more experiences, more learnings that you need. It kind of goes back almost full circle to that tension point between conviction and flexibility, right? Because it's like, I think we can sometimes get hung up on, oh my God, would 20-year-old Thomas or 16-year-old Steph, what would she think about what I'm doing today? And it's like, there's some things you need to let go of, because they just didn't know what we know today.
I think what's really interesting about that is exactly as I said right at the beginning, is that you can have this big, hairy, audacious goal, this North Star, which doesn't change. But your way of getting there through all the learnings that you take does. There are multiple different roads you can take through that. So I think like for 20-year-old Thomas, if you asked him like, what did he want to solve? It would still be the climate crisis.
And exactly.
The answer would still be the same now. But the difference would be
in a surprising way.
Exactly. And it would, and it's interesting because like, I'm still bullish about the work that Greenpeace do. I still encourage people to sign up as members. I'm still selling their mission to people. I'm still bullish about being a founder and like believing that I can solve things better than like a lot of people can. I still believe that. But I also believe that going through that organization, Greenpeace, going through the startups as a founder, puts me in a position where I can look at other founders and hopefully John and Jenna would agree, have like quite a good perspective on what makes them successful and what's going to work. And look, time will tell, of course, but I think that you take these learnings as you go, and it doesn't matter if you stick with it for 5 years or jump to every it's how you're learning through that, how you're listening to the things that are presented to you, and then how you use that in whatever you decide to, even if it's the same thing.
And I think as part of getting older as well is a realization that there are other levers to pull to have greater impact that weren't immediately obvious when you were younger, or at all obvious. And I think that there was another point I was going to make on that as well. I don't know what's going on with my brain at the moment. I'm like,
really want the pizza.
It's getting hot in here. I know, exactly. What else I was going to say is, oh crap, it's on the tip of my tongue. with
Big
the
Vision, learnings, Greenpeace, to startups, to investing.
is you don't need to be a martyr in the process either. And I think there's that, like, when you're younger and just more naive and you just don't have as much knowledge of like how the world works and systems, and like I had no clue about business. I had no clue about that when I was young, obviously, right? So and I think it's kind of like when you're younger, you've got that like, I've got to do something myself. It feels like you're one person against the world. You're on that mission. Whereas like actually getting in the system and like affecting it from within is where I was going with that.
Well,
So
I mean, even the most evidenced arrogant founders know that even though they probably are and know it, that they are the best people to solve the problem, they also know that they can't do it alone.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to need to collaborate with investors. They're going to need to collaborate with the partners that they sell to, or the marketing people that come in and support them, or the PR, or whatever it is. Yeah. And at the most important level, their team. Like, it's not a one-man. You can't do it as a one-man band. So, like, I think that really importantly, like, it's not so much about like believing you can just go it alone, or it's not so much about like this martyrdom of like I'll sacrifice everything for the cause.
Exactly.
It's just that you learn
what's actually the most effective route,
exactly, while still believing
exactly
that, particularly I'm speaking from a founder's perspective here, but like still believing that you're the best person to lead, but just not doing it alone.
Exactly.
And the founders need to be open to that.
They
need to be willing to accept that.
So penultimate question, a similar theme with this kind of like, this has been such a great opportunity to be reflective. You know, these are markers in time where we get to sit down and like go through your journey. We were talking before about, you know, the younger versions of ourselves. What would you say to not even the 20-year-old Thomas, but the Thomas of just a couple of years ago to like in those final days with Canopey? What advice would you go back and give him now?
Honestly, just trust that it will work out. And I think that everyone says this when they've gone through difficult times and they come out the other side of it. And look, everyone consistently has other challenges that they're faced with. I mean, look, I'm Muslim. We know this. And I think that we believe that challenges are presented to us to help us grow and to prove our faith, right? So even if you didn't have that, the same principles, even if you're an atheist, it's believe the process, trust that you know how to get through this, and trust that this challenge is going to help you grow as a person. And I can do that through my faith, but also I would do that regardless now. So I think that's really what I would say, because probably a year and a half ago, Thomas was stressing the heck out.
Right,
so,
exactly.
So I would just say, look, take a breather. It's going to be okay. You know best. And listen to the people who care.
Love that. Well, if there are any founders listening to this right now that are feeling like down in the dumps, things are stressful, this is the version of you in a couple of years' time that you're getting to hear now on this show. And
also reach out. like I say this cautiously, but because when you've got VC in your title, like, everyone reaches out. But it's good. But I mean it. Like, look, the difference that we have as a team, but also I particularly like care about, is that we've been there. We've been in the trenches. We know how you feel. We might not be the investor for you, but I definitely care about what founders are going through. So if you're a founder that is going through like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what's happening, there's these challenges, look, find me on LinkedIn, drop me a message, explain where you heard it, and I can at least try and give you my perspective on it. But it might not be relevant, so just be prepared.
That's really kind of you, Thomas. Appreciate that. All right, traditional closing question to wrap the show. One tragedy that's taught you an unforgettable lesson.
Well, Steph,
if we haven't already.
Tragedy?
That's typically the response to that question. Like,
how many? Yeah.
Something we haven't already covered.
Wow, I think probably that we haven't covered. Like, what the? Well, I think like it's difficult because I think last time I probably spoke about at the ending of my swimming career, and if I didn't, then it's a good one because it was the first major tragedy that my own life experience. Like there's tragedies always around you, but like this was something that I was passionate about, I wanted to do, and it was stopped because I got injured, right?
I think that was your answer to last time.
But it has to be the same, because what it did is it laid the foundation for every major tragedy that came afterwards, to know that, look, swimming was my life. I was going to the Olympics. I deeply cared about that. I deeply cared about the sport. I cared about my team, and it was just like that was all taken away pretty quickly. And I think that tragedy allowed me to kind of go, well, whatever tragedy comes, I can deal with it. And I think that every founder, if you can sort of anchor yourself in something that happened to you, and it doesn't have to be huge, right? But it just has to be something where you really had this like epiphany of like, well, fuck, I can't do this thing I love anymore. You can use that to a brilliant strength. And it's whether the company fails or whether it's just a day-to-day challenge, use that feeling
as reassurance that you got through it,
reassurance that you can get through it. Really specifically, because sure, there are other people who can get through challenges, and I'm sure that every founder knows someone who could get through the challenge they're going through, but you have to believe that this was meant for you and you will find a way through it. If it works, if it doesn't work, it's not the point. The point is that there is another side to it. So yeah, I think the swimming has to come back again.
Incredible. I love that. Thomas, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I love doing this, like now that the show has been going for long enough now, to kind of like actually revisit, like where are some of them, like what happened during that time, and use this as like a reflective opportunity for you as well, but also I think one of the best opportunities to like relay those lessons learned the hard way again, even more so. So thank you so much again, and thank you so much for listening. If you're still with us, then thank you so much. Really hope you enjoyed this. Do hit that subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you next time.